Miss Tamar Shafler, and she's a senior product manager at Trusteer, now IBM Security. So Tamar has over 15 years experience in software development, design, and product management. And as a senior PM in Trusteer, she's responsible for defining the strategy and roadmap for Trusteer's Apex. Prior to joining Trusteer, Tamar was a PM at Checkpoint Software Technologies and some other companies. And she will talk about fighting a cyber arms race with constant innovation. So Tamar, please.
Thank you, Niv, and thanks everybody for, well, I'll need to be over here for you to hear me. So thank you everybody for staying that late in the day. And earlier today, you heard about some evasion techniques, some sophisticated methods of attack. And what we're here to discuss today is how we can, well, sorry about that. How we can overcome, how we can fight this growing sophistication and advanced threat landscape. So just to give you an idea of how much it costs, and I believe we saw some numbers in Ofir's presentation as well. Based on a survey that we did with Ponemon, we found that on average, a lost data record, the cost of a breach, the average cost of a breach per data record is over $154. And that represents an increase of 23% over the previous year. And if you think about, for example, eBay, that last October had 150 million records stolen, multiply that by this average cost, and you will understand why they cited that breach as the main cause for their decrease in revenues. So it's not surprising that organizations, the industry is spending more and more money, throwing more and more money on security. And as we can see, over the previous 5-6 years, there's been a 35% growth in the spend on IT security. These numbers are from the IDC. Gartner's site even double these numbers. So a lot of money is being thrown into security solutions to combat, to fight the threats that we're seeing. However, even though there's more and more money being spent on security, we see a growth in successful attacks. So there's a site that I really like. It's called Hackmageddon, and it lists all the breaches, all the main breaches that occurred week by week. So just counting all the attacks that happened in not even the first half of this year until May, 440 breaches, that's 22 per week on average. And we see a staggering growth over 2014. So we spend more money, but there are more and more attacks because of the growing sophistication. Some examples that we've seen in the previous months. There was a major breach with a health insurance company, Anthem, in February. The personal information of several millions users was stolen, and interestingly enough, one of the destination of command and control that was used in this attack had the name we11point.com. Anthem was just a few months before that breach was acquired, and its previous name was WellPoint. So we11point looks pretty similar to WellPoint. So it seemed like when they were reviewing logs in SIEM solution or their security controls, it seemed like a legitimate address. However, that address was used to steal information, to exfiltrate information. The Carbonac example that Itzik already presented, and we talk about the same major breaches, even though there were 440 in the first 5 months of the year. There are some that stand out from the crowd. Carbonac $1 billion stolen, a very evasive, very sophisticated attack. However, it started with phishing emails sent to employees in the different banks that then led the users, the employees, to download the rat, the Carbonac rat. Another interesting, well, for me it was interesting, the TV5 Monde attack that was allegedly performed by the ISIS hacking group that caused a blackout of this public television channel. 11 channels actually were blacked out for 4 hours, and including takeover of their social media channels. This attack also started with phishing emails sent to all journalists in the network in TV5. It took only 3 of them to click the email, to click the attachment in the email, download a rat, a remote admin tool that infected machines that later allowed the attackers to black out the channels. So we see more and more successful attacks, even though we're spending more money on solutions. And that's because the basic premise of our environment stays the same and even becomes more complicated. On one hand, we have vulnerable systems. I have here the number that X-Force report cited in the first quarter of 2015. So they disclosed over 30,000 vulnerabilities in 2014. That's not including some mobile vulnerabilities that were found that are cited in a different report. So on one hand, we have vulnerable systems that are vulnerable to attacks. On the other hand, we have a growing sophistication in attack methods. So the Verizon data breach report cited that between 70 to 90% of the breaches in 2014 were carried out by a threat, a malware that was unique to the organization attacked. Another research, another survey by Lastline cite that over 2014 they saw a growth of 300%, so twice as much as evasive malware as they saw at the beginning of the year. So there's growing sophistication of attack methods. Systems are vulnerable, and the weakest link is always the user. In 82% of attacks in 2014, there was some kind of a human factor involved, either phishing or social engineering or a combination of these factors. So the majority of the attacks are the entry point, the first point of the attack would be the user. And it was really, when I first saw that number, I was really surprised to see that 23% of users actually open a phishing email. But then something happened in a company that I know that's very security aware, and still users click on phishing emails. Either they are expecting this package in the mail, or it's a spear phishing that's highly targeted to attack that specific company, so the information appears to be legit. 23% of users will open a phishing email. Over half of them will click on the attachment. So the combination of these factors does lead to a successful attack, and this is why we're seeing more and more attacks being successful over the past years. And I mentioned the TV5 breach, and that picture was taken after the breach. So in news coverage of the breach, this journalist of TV5 Monde that was just breached and blacked out for 4 hours, I don't know if the resolution is good enough, but these are actually usernames and passwords being on Post-its on the wall, and he's being filmed, and that's on national TV. So speaking of careless users, by the way, the password for their YouTube channel was le mot de passe de YouTube, which is the password for YouTube. So that's difficult to crack. So careless users, what can we do about them? We can educate them, but that only will take us so far. And that's an imperative, that's a very important parameter, that's a very important component of a successful attack. And if we look at the attack lifecycle, how an attack is being carried out, and I believe most of you have seen this type of flow at one point or another, usually starting with one of two main, as I said, 82% of the attacks are involving some social engineering or some human factor, either sending, does that work? I don't know. I don't know how it works. Technology. So starting at the top with sending a weaponized attachment, that is some attachment that contains an exploit of a vulnerability in an exploitable application, like a Word document, a PDF, Excel, and so on. That document contains an exploit, a piece of code that will exploit a vulnerability to get out of the context of the exploited application, and then run code outside the context of this exploited application to download malware, install it on the infected machine, and ultimately that's the holy grail or the ultimate goal, to reach sensitive information and exfiltrate it. Send it outside of the organization to the attacker's command and control. Alternatively, the attack can also be carried out by sending some link to entice the user to click on that link and either provide their credentials. So you may be getting an email that pretends to be from the IT department saying you need to change your password, and to change your password, you need to enter your original password. Or an email that redirects the user to some malicious or exploited site that behind the scene as a drive-by download will download malware and again install malware on the end user's machine. And we found, our research found that at least 1 in 500 machines in organizations that we surveyed, that we monitored, at least 1 in 500 machines in an organization is infected with a sophisticated, with an invasive malware. So yeah, we've seen that. The Carbonac, as I said, is a popular, it's an interesting attack. And if I map this to the layout, the life cycle of the attack that I showed before, it started with emails being sent to employees in banks that contained Word document or CPL files. Once these files contain an exploit, once they were opened, the exploit ran and downloaded the Carbonac malware, the Carbonac rat, to the employees' machines. Carbonac, it started as a variation of Carburp and Annac, but then it diverted completely. So it was a completely new, completely unknown rat at the time. From that, as Itzik explained, it traversed, it had a lateral movement in the network. And what's interesting is that it transmitted to the command and control, it transmitted video captures, screen captures, loggings of keystrokes from the employee's machine as part of the reconnaissance phase of the attack to learn. And there was a human at the other side watching these videos of bank's employees and analyzing the actions that they're taking in order to carry out the sophisticated attack that ultimately led to $1 billion stolen. Another example that just happened this month, just a couple of weeks ago, I got an email from my colleagues in Japan saying we had there's a major breach in the pension fund, in the National Pension Fund. The records of about 1.25 million people that are covered by the pension fund in Japan, these records were stolen. The The trigger or the beginning of the attack was with a very convincing email message. That's in Japanese, but you can see it online. Very convincing email message that contained a notice of health insurance, so very relevant to employees in the Japanese National Pension Fund. It contained an attachment, and the attachment was a zip file containing a self-extracting executable that, once opened, pretended to be not exactly Word. I believe it was Ichita. Did I say that? Ichita. Okay. Ichita, which is the Japanese equivalent, Japanese version of Word. So the employee, usually when you click on, well, you don't click, obviously. When one clicks on an exploited document, the exploited application, Adobe Reader or Word, will crash because it's not a legitimate document, so the application, the viewer, crashes. In this case, because it was a self-extracting executable that then launched Ichitao, then the user actually saw the document, so it seemed completely legitimate. And behind the scenes, it downloaded a rat, blue termite, Kaspersky named it, lateral movement, of course, and ultimately sent files, sensitive information, emails, browser information from users to a command and control. I have another super evasive, but I see that time is getting short. So one of the reasons that I enjoy being in this industry so much is that it's a cat and mouse, and I don't refer to the kernel cat. It's a cat and mouse game, and as attacks are becoming more and more sophisticated, so do the security solutions. And I'll skip this comparison of airport security and cybersecurity, just saying the evolution of solutions from being based on prior knowledge like signatures or patterns identification is now shifting over to identifying anomalies and analyzing the behavior of applications. And if we look at the life cycle of an attack, as I showed before, we've mapped the number of samples that are required to correctly identify malware. And in different stages, as we can see, in the entry point with the exploit, in the installation stage, that's the malware, and the exit point, there are countless, there's an infinite number of samples, different signatures. It's very easy to change a signature. I'm not even going to talk about polymorphism, dynamically generated addresses of command and control. But what we've identified is that there are certain choke points, strategic choke points, where the number of patterns, the number of possible variations is the smallest. So for example, when the Carbonac attack was carried out, or the Japanese pension fund was breached with an email containing an exploit, when the user opened the exploit, it was trying to perform certain operations that are abnormal to that application. So something that is abnormal to PDF reader, to Word, to Ichitao, it was trying to get out of the context and execute some code, communicate outside. We identify these points, that's the strategic choke points. We identify these points, we map this abnormal behavior, and that's where we can identify and block the attack. In a similar manner, if the attack didn't start with an exploit, but a user-initiated action, like they downloaded something and ran something, eventually the attack will try to communicate outside of the network to send the sensitive information. When the malware is trying to open a communication outside, and not necessarily direct communication, usually evasive malware will not be doing that. Rather, it will try to inject code into other processes. It will try to write on the memory of other processes. Again, we identify these abnormal operations, and that's where we block the attack. Well, I had a short summary to say that there's no silver bullet, there's no one magic solution to the problem. We need to have a defense in depth, so layered approach, real time, not just monitoring. Yes, it's very important to have visibility, but we also need to be able to prevent the attacks in real time. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you very much. Sorry for rushing through the end. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them. I will be here later. Okay, thanks.